Good afternoon. Today I shall be giving you a very brief preview of The Whitsun Weddings, a poem by Philip Larkin. The Whitsun Weddings is one of the best known poems by British poet Philip Larkin. It was written and rewritten several times and finally published in 1964 in a collection of poems which was also titled The Whitsun Weddings. It is one of the very few poems that Larkin wrote about train journeys. The poem, as we have it in the final version, comprises 8 stanzas of 10 lines each, making it one of the longest of his poems. The rhyming scheme is AB AB, CD E, CD E, a rhyme scheme quite similar to what Keats used in his odes. Larkin describes a stopping train journey southwards from Paragon Station in Kingston upon Hull, where Larkin was a librarian at the university on a hot Whitsun Saturday afternoon. Its appeal derives from its faithful depiction of familiar experiences, a hot day's train journey, the landscape of post war and post industrial England, the noise and bustle of wedding parties at railway stations, the gradual shift from specific observation to general reflection. There is too a remarkable technical control of language, in which we find a careful development of feeling and attitude. The poem has secured for itself a significant place in the tradition of English poetry. As mentioned earlier, the subject of the poem is a train journey from the north of England to London and the poet's observation of the various wedding parties he sees boarding the train at different stations on the way. We begin with the remarkable recreation of the sensations of traveling by train on a summer's day, the heat, the relief after the rush to catch the train. Larkin says, all sense of being in a hurry gone. The snapshot details viewed through the carriage window as the town gives way to countryside. Larkin's description accurately captures the speaker's mechanical registration of fleeting detail, the backs of houses, the street of blinding windscreens, the smell of the fish dock all flash by too quickly to engage anything more than a vague interest, until we see the river's estuary when the poem's rhythm slows to catch the sensation of amplitude and tranquility, where sky and Lincolnshire and water meet, as Larkin says. The second stanza of the poem continues the journey inland through the tall heat that slept for miles. The poet's senses are engaged but not wholly absorbed in his observations, for he is, of course, isolated in the train from the world outside it, and that world is presented to him in a fleeting sequence of images framed by the window. He watches but is unconvinced and uninvolved of what is happening around him. And we sense in the succession of details in this stanza a hint of boredom in the speaker. Nevertheless, Larkin presents to us a familiar and recognizable English landscape that varies from wide farms to canals with floatings of industrial froth and the featureless appearance of new towns approached with acres of dismantled cars. The third stanza of the poem introduces a growing alertness and responsiveness to the scene around the speaker. He is roused from his reading and the drowsiness of heat and sunshine by the noise and color of a wedding party in the shaded platform, struck for the first time on this journey by something that seems to have, for him, some significance. The girls posed irresolutely, waving their farewells to the married couple on the train, are signaling both a conclusion and a beginning. As if, Larkin says, out on the end of an event, waving goodbye to something that survived it. Now, the poet's interest is caught. He is more curious than earlier and sees the next wedding party in different terms, not quite so vaguely, and even with a growing sense of skepticism. His description of perspiring fathers with seamy foreheads, mothers loud and fat, and uncles shouting smart indicates his distaste for the jaunty vulgarity of the occasion. The women are gaudy in their cheap finery, which marks them off unreally from the rest, and the occasion itself is tawdry. He says, banquet halls are yards and bunting dressed, coach party annexes. Advice is thrown as inconsequentially as confetti. Now observing the scene more closely, but still with a detached aloofness, the poet sees what the event has signified to the participants. The children's boredom, the father's swaggering self-importance, the women's knowingness sharing the secret like a happy funeral, and the younger girl's uneasy somberness. Returning his attention to the new occupants of the train, the poet's tone shifts again. He is now aware of how all these newlywed couples are sharing this journey and is struck by the thought that for a brief moment each of these couples is united in a common experience. It is an experience which now partly includes the speaker as well. No longer a spectator, he has become somewhat closer to a participant, and this is shown in his use of the first person plural. We hurried towards London, and in his anticipating what the dozen couples will say of this journey in the future. The landscape they watch is one he watches too, and although none thought of the others they would never meet, or how their lives would all contain this hour, the poet himself escapes this self-absorption and becomes their representative in recognizing and memorializing this moment for them. Having recognized how the dozen couples are now assimilated with him in the journey, the speaker's attitude is developed. A poem that began with a sense of isolation, then amused detachment, shifting to distaste, and now a closer involvement, ends with a moving compassion. As the train rushes into London, past walls of blackened moss, which seem to draw perilously close, the speaker is suddenly aware of the future's potential contained in this moment, on this train, ready to be loosed with the all power that being changed can give. These dozen couples have undergone a ritual which marks a change in their lives, a new beginning perhaps. As the train slows, the sensation of falling suggests to Larkin an image of launching, as if the shared journey is the impetus which will project these new lives into their separate futures. We slowed again, he says, and as the tightened brakes took hold, there swelled a sense of falling, like an arrow shard sent out of sight somewhere becoming rain. The image of the arrow shower is complex. Rain does not fall in a parabolic curve, as it were, and what Larkin is asking us to imagine is a flight of arrows, a shower, which falls out of the sight somewhere in the future as rain. Arrows might suggest Cupid's darts, less fancifully perhaps. Larkin uses the metaphor of arrows to extend the image of lives being projected from the present into the future through the marriage. That is an image of procreation and growth is made further clear by the shower rain metaphor of fertility. This is the power that being changed can give. The progress towards happiness and fulfillment is undertaken, even if its achievement is out of sight, unforeseeable, and uncertain. This is one of Larkin's most celebratory poems, although some critics have argued that the final image is one of negative foreboding. It is true that the speaker at first regards the weddings with suspicion and even patronizing haughtiness, but Larkin's language makes clear that this is not his final view of the marriages. The couples are free at last, he says, and there is a sense of abundance in their being loaded with the sum of all they saw. The journey is for them a moment of transition between past and future, the end of an event, that is their marriage, which has given way to something that survived it. Their journey is incomplete, for although the train may stop in London, their lives, all containing this hour, take off from there. This sense of incompleteness is caught even in the description of what they see. The cricketer running up to board, an incomplete action, foreshadows the image of the arrow shooter. Moreover, when the poet thinks of London lying ahead of them, spread out in the sun, its postal districts, packed like squares of wheat, the image again suggests fertility, abundance, sustenance. The borough, the borough boundaries on a map look like densely packed cornfields seen from above, and the use of swelled in the final sentence of the poem similarly suggests plenitude. The poem is not so sentimental as to suggest that these couples will find contentment. Rather, the journey itself is used as a metaphor for time and change. The marriage ceremonies are a symbolic expression of change, a change which has the power to create a future for itself, just as the train's journey is a succession of different images from one moment to the next. Of course, the speaker is not a full participant in this change that has been chosen by the married couples around him. By a journey that began with the poet's purely mechanical interest in what lay outside him, ends with a positive affirmation of the human capacity to change the direction of life, even if that direction cannot itself be determined. The poem's real triumph, perhaps, is in the mastery of language, by which the shape and feel of experience is precisely rendered by Larkin. The regularity of rhyme and rhythm helps to create a sense of inevitability, a pattern of movement. The landscapes of contemporary England are observed with delicate precision. We also do not fail to notice the vivid compactness which makes a hothouse flash uniquely, where that surprisingly abstract word seems inevitable and just in, suggesting the momentary alignment of the sun, glass, and observer. Similarly, in the final stanza, the train is described as a frail traveling coincidence, reminding us not only how closely it approaches the encroaching walls, but also how accidentally and arbitrarily these couples happen to be gathered together on this train. How each moment in our lives is a train traveling coincidence brought about by chance. At the end of the poem, our literal falling forward as a train slows towards a stop is converted into a metaphor expressing how the future is unpredictably launched from the present. The pause in the run-on line between swelled and a sense of falling itself imitates that sense of falling. This ability to capture physical sensation can also be seen in the tall heat that slept for miles inland, conveying the claustrophobic stillness and numbing drowsiness of a hot summer's day. As with many of Larkin's poems, it is the little local detail that make the Whitsun weddings such a memorable evocation of England in the post-war era. The critical issue that a reader is confronted with is whether the Whitsun weddings is a celebration of marriage. On this issue, the poem seems clearly ambivalent. An analysis of the terms Larkin uses in the reference to marriage reveals some skepticism on Larkin's part. The guests wave goodbye to the departing train as if bidding farewell to something that survived the wedding service itself. The wedding is referred to as a happy funeral, as if weddings and funerals share more than simply their status as religious ceremonies. The wedding too is a farewell ceremony. Bidding farewell to what, if we may ask? They are bidding farewell to single life, to the youthful phase of their lives, perhaps even to the bride's virginity. After all, the marriage, or perhaps more specifically, the consummation of the marriage on the wedding night, is a religious wounding, to quote Larkin. But the poem is a little more circumspect than this. The first two of these three negative descriptions of marriage are offered in the form of subjunctive phrases like as if, out on the end, or like a happy funeral. We perhaps may not say that the marriage is a sort of inverted funeral, as Larkin's speaker seems to say, but that it might be viewed like this as an interpretation. We can analyze Whitsun weddings as a celebration of marriage, albeit one that is tempered significantly by Larkin's own skepticism towards marriage, love, and relationships. It is partly the enigmatic and ambiguous nature of the images and tone of the poem which makes the poem so richly complex. However, we prefer to interpret its message. To conclude, in spite of its ambivalences, this poem can be read as a celebration of marriage, although one that is tempered, as I told you earlier, by Larkin's own skepticism towards it. It is partly the enigmatic and ambiguous nature of the images and tone of the poem which make the poem so richly complex and intriguing, and this is perhaps why this poem has remained one of the most anthologized poems of Larkin in the present times.